Yeah, there's definitely a generational war going on in America. And the war is fought between a generation that gets to make all the decisions, but they probably won't live long enough to feel the consequences of those decisions, and a generation that gets absolutely no say in what goes on, but they have to be the ones to deal with the consequences.
According to the Federal Reserve, baby boomers have officially become the richest generation to ever live,
Wow.
holding over 51% of the nation's total wealth.
Dang.
And as emerging generations inherit a national debt set to grow by 63% within the next decade, a collapsing job market, record
Crazy.
housing prices, and a cost of living crisis, it raises the question, why did the richest generation in history sell out the nation's future?
But I'm pretty sure a lot of that wealth is concentrated in a top minority of the boomers. Like I think like 90 or 80% of the wealth that he's talking about right now is concentrated within the top like 5 to 10% of the boomers.
Baby boomers came of age during an era when a part-time minimum wage job could cover the full cost of college tuition. Lifelong careers were often secured by a firm handshake, and housing prices were so low that nearly half of all 27-year-olds owned a home.
Half?
The reality is that
Bro, the average age for a first-time home buyer now is like 40 years old, and the average age for a second-time home buyer is like 56. We just truly live in a different world, and I think part of the issue is when Gen Z voices their grievances towards this different world, they're met with just work harder. And because their grievances are ignored, yet the boomers still have all of the power to actually do something about it, I think that drives resentment.
this image of generational prosperity was never shared across all baby boomers. When looking at how the generation's $85 trillion in total wealth is actually distributed, a level that is structurally impossible for any other living generation to achieve, nearly 3/4 of it is held by just the top 10% within the generation, where the responsibility for the nation's economic trajectory and theft of its future truly resides. Much of that concentration traces back to their parents' access to the GI Bill, which functioned less as a universal benefit and more as a sorting mechanism that shaped the economic outcomes of the largest generation in American history. For families excluded from the GI Bill, the post-war promise never materialized. Black veterans were routinely denied access through discriminatory lending, segregated universities, and local VA offices that refused to process applications, while rural veterans often lacked the educational institutions, banks, and infrastructure necessary to meaningfully utilize the benefits at all. Of the 2.7 million Americans who served in the Vietnam War, roughly 80% were baby boomers from poor working-class families unable to afford college deferments, only to return home to a nation already facing economic stagnation. But for the families who benefited, baby boomers were raised in conditions that marked a historic rise from scarcity, defined by comfort, attention, and material abundance. The sheer size of the generation, combined with this economic leverage, shifted industries to fundamentally curate the economy around their wants and expectations.
Yes, because when they couldn't get what they wanted, they became hippies. But then once they got what they wanted, they sold out to capitalism right away. Like, I think boomers are the first generation where you used to retire and you go to Miami and live like in a small condo because that's all you needed. Now boomers are retiring into houses that are even bigger. You'll see these stories of people selling the family farm so that they can go and buy a Corvette.
At the same time, prevailing psychological thought urged parents to treat children as equals and frame challenging adult authority as healthy self-expression, reinforcing a worldview in which accommodation was not a privilege, but a requirement. What European observers at the time would simply describe as spoiled. Cultural historian Lawrence Samuel noted that Europeans who worked as camp counselors in the United States during the late 1950s were often taken back by the brashness of American children, describing them as pseudo-mature and superficially self-assured, with respect granted to adults only when authority had to be earned. Having fun mattered above all else, and the word spoiled appeared more frequently than any other descriptor. Counselors observed that American children were already highly materialistic, more interested in cars, television, and business than their European counterparts, with parental affection often expressed through consumption rather than restraint, contributing to the early labeling of young baby boomers as the me generation, defined by coddling, pampering, and self-serving priorities. While these same accusations would only be redirected to every emerging generation, the more economically relevant reality is that many maintain those same self-serving attitudes as they rose into positions of power. Despite often being defined by their countercultural revolution, early baby boomers ultimately embraced the very material comforts they protested against.
Yes, because they weren't even really hippies. They just wanted to do drugs and have sex. And as they got older, they started getting married because marriage was still possible because these people still came from two-parent households. Even though they rejected it, they still came from two-parent households, but they kept the free love mentality and taught that to their kids because it worked for them. But really, it just eventually led to like more broken households. And now I think primarily because of that philosophy, like the whole dating market is completely ruined. And even when Gen Z voices their grievances about the family court system or about the hardships of dating, it's still met with that same type of, well, just be better type of mentality. And I think that, again, drives resentment.
One younger boomer, interviewed by the American Prospect, blatantly acknowledged the hypocrisy of older counterparts, stating, "They always talk about how they marched and protested, and now they're the same ones who are stepping over homeless people to buy Rolexes," or that abandonment of principle was reinforced by the extraordinary economic opportunity they entered adulthood with.
Yeah.
A 1966 Business Week report noted, employers were resorting to gimmicks to lure sorely needed workers from other companies and other countries, with Ford and others even combing Appalachia and the Ozarks in search of coon and squirrel hunters, allowing early boomers to rapidly move into high-paying corporate and financial roles, marking the rise of the yuppie era, defined by the expansion of Wall Street's influence, the prioritization of short-term profits, and the adoption of shareholder value as the dominant corporate objective. Under this boomer leadership, corporate raiding became the prevailing business model. Companies were acquired and stripped for assets, divisions deemed unprofitable were shuttered, and large-scale layoffs accelerated the deindustrialization of the United States as production shifted overseas and capital flowed into financial markets. Organized labor was simultaneously undermined, with one anti-union consultant writing in the Wall Street Journal that the current government and business climate presents a unique opportunity for companies to develop and implement long-term plans for conducting business in a union-free environment, arguing that the critical test was whether management had the intellectual discipline and foresight to capitalize on this rare moment in our history.
Wow. Yeah, and I think a big part of deindustrialization that a lot of people don't think about is when it went global, those companies that relied on smaller town communities, when they relied on those communities, they had an incentive to treat those people well because those were the people that were going to work in their factories. So the companies relied on the people and the people relied on the companies. Like there were even articles of John D. Rockefeller putting out propaganda of him handing out nickels and quarters to kids because he wanted a good image for the people that were working in his factories and in the communities that were working in his factories. But once everything went global, these companies realized they didn't have to treat people well anymore. They could essentially just give the jobs to the lowest bidder, and they wanted to pay the lowest amount they legally could.
By openly recognizing the failures within American society and later holding the institutional power to address them, they instead chose to dismantle the very systems designed to serve the public while pulling up the ladder for every emerging generation behind them.
Oh, they didn't pull up the ladder. They burned that motherfucker, and now they're basking in the warmth of the bonfire.
Lack of future investment first fell directly onto those born into the later half of the cohort, often referred to as Generation Jones, who entered adulthood in a fundamentally different economy than those who defined the generation's reputation. Job security never existed for them. They graduated into a labor market already framing entry-level work as obsolete, where wage stagnation collided almost immediately with rising inflation and a deepening distrust in American institutions. The presidency was not defined by JFK, but by Tricky Dick, Watergate, and the realization that government power was far more capable of protecting itself than serving the public. Watching early boomers abandon their countercultural ideals for material reward, Generation Jones did not see reform as attainable, but instead looked inward towards self-preservation and career survival. A mindset further shaped by the constant threat of nuclear war and a growing sense that the future was no longer guaranteed. In a letter to President Kennedy, one child wrote, "I am 9 years old. I don't like the plans you are planning. I am too young to die." Another 11-year-old asked, "What will be left of this wonderful world in 10 years if someone presses the button?" According to Awaiting Armageddon, teachers reported a noticeable shift in student artwork, particularly in a rise of mushroom clouds. Beside a drawing of an explosion, one 6-year-old girl submitted a self-portrait of her own death.
So basically, because of the threat of nuclear war, they were incentivized to make more short-term decisions for their own benefit?
Common joke during these years was, what do you want to be if you grow up? While others openly said that if they learned the bomb was coming, they would run outside and stand in it rather than duck and cover. And when the largest generation in history grows up believing there is no future, while those in power dismantle the institutions that once made long-term planning possible, short-term survival replaces long-term responsibility, setting the stage for political decisions detached from the financial well-being of future generations.
There's some type of old wisdom talking about this. It's something like, a nation is great when the men are willing to plant trees that they know they'll never enjoy the shade of.
And to ensure I'm planning not just for my financial well-being, but for the future, This is why I use Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a
Okay,
personal finance
get your
app
check.
that
Gotta
helps you
watch
save
the ad.
more,
It's a
spend
respect
less,
thing.
and take control of your financial life, having already saved users over $880 million in canceled subscriptions. In addition to tools such as bill negotiation, Rocket Money also has features that help you curate a custom budget, monitor your credit score,
Okay.
and create automatic savings based on your spending habits.
Not bad.
I have personally leveraged Rocket Money by not only using their budgeting tools to help track the evolving software costs required to make these videos, but also to streamline the news and data that I pay for in relation to this channel,
Okay.
where they help me condense 18 subscriptions and paywalled hiring data down to just 10, saving me $800 in canceled subscriptions.
Okay.
So if you want to reclaim control of your financial journey, click the link in the description to get started on your free premium trial, or scan the QR code on screen.
Nice.
That's rocketmoney.com/Damon Cassidy to get started on your free premium trial.
All right, get
Thank
your
you,
money.
Rocket Money, for sponsoring this
Let's go,
video.
let's
Now,
go.
despite representing just 20% of the population, baby boomers still account for 43% of all members of the 119th U.S. Congress.
What? Bro, that is actually insane. And what makes this even worse is that these people all grew up in a world that doesn't exist anymore, and they've all been in such positions of power for so long, they have become completely detached from what it means to be a regular person today, and they're making all of the decisions. Like, I would argue, like, for a while, the fastest way to travel as a human for thousands of years was horseback, and then because of the acceleration with technology, you had trains, and then you had cars, and then you had planes, and then you had rocket ships, and all these different things. I think with technology, it makes things accelerate even faster. So to see that all of the decisions are being made by a generation that is so detached, and by people specifically that are so detached from what it means to be a regular person today, is like probably the worst part about this. These people have been rich for 40 years and they got married 30 years ago when the world was different. And then they're trying to tell us how we should operate in today's society.
They hold 39% of the seats in the House, marking the first time in decades that Generation X has surpassed them, while still controlling nearly 60% of the Senate, ensuring that long-term policymaking remains concentrated in the hands of a cohort approaching retirement rather than the generations expected to live with its consequences. And when political power is held by a generation that never had to seriously plan for a diminished future, it becomes easier to understand why American policy has trapped the nation in endless remembrance rather than deliberate planning. In the 1980 campaign slogan, "Let's make America great again," Ronald Reagan promised to get the government off the backs of the American people while restoring national prosperity. In practice, this meant dismantling many of the institutional guardrails that have protected workers throughout the post-war era. He slashed the top marginal tax rate from 70% to 28%, weakening the progressive tax structure that had funded middle-class growth. In 1981, he fired more than 11,000 striking air traffic controllers, sending a clear national signal that breaking unions was no longer a political risk, but an acceptable business strategy. His administration deregulated finance, telecommunications, transportation, and energy, laying the groundwork for the corporate consolidation that would define the next 4 decades. And under the banner of free trade, Reagan and those who followed embraced a global economic model that rewarded companies for moving production overseas in pursuit of cheaper labor, shifting the long-term costs onto workers and future generations.
Of course.
And did baby boomers hold Reagan accountable for not upholding his end of the bargain? No, they voted for him again. Of the 16.1 million jobs added during Reagan's presidency, 12.5 million were concentrated in low-wage sectors like retail, janitorial work, and food service. When Bill Clinton became the first baby boomer president in history and signified the final nail in the coffin for America's manufacturing base, did baby boomers stand up and fight for their jobs or the implications of a weakened manufacturing power? No, they voted for him again. Of the 22 million jobs created during Clinton's presidency, an estimated 40 to 45% were concentrated in low-skill, low-wage service work, with most of the so-called high-wage gains coming not from a stronger labor market, but from the temporary speculation of the dot-com bubble. And while the 1990s are still often cited as a period of rising incomes, much of that growth was driven by Americans simply working more. By 1998, the typical middle-income family worked a combined 3,885 hours per year, an increase of 247 hours, or roughly 6 additional weeks compared to 1989.
Wow. And fast forward to now, you need like 3 jobs just to exist. And one of the biggest sellouts, bro, that a lot of people don't talk about is the cost of opportunity. It's the cost of opportunity. The fact that in this time you could work with one income and have that much free time, the benefit of that isn't just the fact that you don't have to work as hard. The benefit of that is you can also take risk when it comes to entrepreneurship or enterprise, and those risks won't destroy you financially for the rest of your life. Like now, if a Gen Zer wants to take a risk and try to open up a business, if he fails, his life is ruined. So it's not just about the fact that you got to work significantly harder and spend more hours working to survive, which is completely destroying us socially also, by the way, but that's a whole different topic. It's not just that aspect of it. It's also the enterprise is going to stagnate because people can't take risks anymore. They just can't afford to take risks. So I've heard boomers make the argument, you know, like we get a lot of flack, but we've also given the world like satellites and the internet and all this innovation. And I'm like, yeah, but that's also baked into the cake. Because you had a stable job market and you could live off of one income, it allowed for you to be able to take more risk with that type of stuff.
National data shows that U.S. workers put in more hours annually than workers in every advanced economy, except for Portugal, all while capturing just 3% of stock market gains and absorbing nearly 40% of the historic rise in consumer debt. When the nation's workforce was gutted by the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, followed by a $700 billion bailout of the very institutions that caused it, did baby boomers ride in the streets alongside their Gen X and millennial counterparts? No. They dismissed it as just another wave of spoiled kids indulging in political theater while lacking any serious or constructive agenda.
And they literally did the same thing just so that they can have sex and do drugs. And don't get me wrong, Occupy Wall Street has some crazy stuff going on. I remember seeing the footage of it when I was like early high school, but they did have some genuine grievances too. In the boomers fight, they were kind of like, yeah, we just want to be able to do drugs and have sex without responsibility.
Due to the severe delay in wealth accumulation, millennials now represent roughly 20% of the population, while holding just $18 trillion in total wealth, compared to baby boomers, who also represent about 20% of the population, but control more than $85 trillion. And even when it comes to something as basic as Gen Z, their own children and grandchildren, now facing the same structural realities of a hollowed-out entry-level job market, historic housing prices, a declining dollar, a cost of living crisis, asset inflation, and wars looming on the horizon. Has there been any effort to offer some guidance, some protection, some long-term planning?
Nah.
No. Instead, they are framed as just another wave of lazy, spoiled kids. And while it was a relatively small cohort of baby boomers who directly dismantled post-war prosperity and entrenched decades of self-indulgent policy, the largest generation in American history cannot be absolved of responsibility simply because they didn't just sign the checks or write the laws.
And one thing I hate the most is when you have these panels of these talking heads who have been in these positions for 40 years straight talking about Gen Z not wanting to be in the workforce. They never have any representation of actual Gen Z. It's just a bunch of 65-year-olds telling Gen Z that they need to work harder. Every time I see those conversations, you hardly ever get to see the actual perspectives of the people that are dealing with the issue. It's always the people who have benefited before them telling them they need to work harder.
Because at the end of the day, nothing was done to stop it from happening. And if we don't hold this lack of action accountable, then it gives us an out to simply repeat history once again, signaling that while America can continue to live on as a global shell company, for it to actually become great again, it must be rebuilt in service of future generations, demanding that we find hope and accountability in one another, using whatever strength we have left to redefine what it truly means to be an American. And so what I hope that we're beginning to recognize is that this blanketed hate and resentment and societal claims of selfishness towards the baby boomer generation do have merits of truth. It's important that we begin to actually dissect and understand why it is that we feel that way. Because if we don't learn from what it is that we're frustrated at, we're going to just continue to repeat history. Future generations are only going to keep having it worse. And we have to stop that from happening. It is up to us to stop the can from getting kicked down the road. A large portion of this video was inspired by a conversation I just had with my dad. I was on the phone with him and he said, you know, the older that I get, the more that I really resent being a part of the baby boomer generation. So he is Gen Jones, right on the cusp of Gen X. So again,
I don't hold them all to it. Like my dad worked very hard and trust me, he's still working to this day. And it's gotten to the point where the politicians have sold out the boomers too, because they trying to tell the boomers they should be working till they 75. I'm like, brother, At what point have you given enough? My dad's been working every day for the past 40 years. Can he not take a break and enjoy his to be honest, his last few years of life? Is that not an option? And so, yeah, it is a boomers thing, but it is kind of important to realize too that a lot of the boomers weren't the ones that actually got the benefit. Even though they still have the same mentality of just work harder, bro, the benefits of all of this was definitely concentrated in a top minority.
He didn't experience the prosperity that we kind of push onto the baby boomer generation.
Mm-hmm.
And
Fair
he said,
enough.
I vividly remember being younger and watching the hippies sell out on what it is that they were fighting for.
Yep.
And go out and start to gut the system. I mean, those were his exact words. And he said, the hypocrisy of my generation. And I think that is really important to understand, because in many ways, I would say, at least for myself, if you kind of just left me alone, I would at least not be as frustrated.
Uh-huh.
If it wasn't actively, me starting to ask some questions, trying to understand, hey, what's going on? Hey, I don't think that this is right. I don't think that, homelessness should be increasing, and childhood poverty should be increasing, and child labor should be having a massive resurgence. And I bring these things to the table, and then I get called lazy and entitled and all of these different things. And so when I hear that and understand you guys went through the exact same thing, it's unbelievably frustrating. And so what really happened was this small but powerful cohort of the baby boomer generation went out and protested and revolted. And because it didn't go their way, like immediately, well, they decided nobody else is going to be able to have it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still paying the price for that. But most importantly, not only are we paying the price economically, but we're paying it in terms of like personal fulfillment.
Right.
What I would argue the real reason that we're here on Earth for,
Yeah.
or, in America for. I think that what we really have to understand is that I almost feel like our society, our economy is built for you to have like these slivers of opportunities to get filthy rich.
Yeah, he talking.
Everything is about leverage and volatility and optimization and risk and selling your soul to get every last dollar and stepping over people and squashing ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for like family development.
Yeah, it never was. Like even parts of the feminist movement and convincing women to go into the workforce, that was funded by capitalist people in this generation that wanted women to flood the workforce so that they could get cheaper labor. That was the whole motivation behind it. Like a lot of people think that the feminist movement was grassroots, just women holding signs in the streets. And actually it was very unpopular for a very long time. But because of the push with billions and billions of dollars of trying to convince women to go into the workforce, abandon family and go into the workforce, eventually it was successful, but the motivation wasn't because they cared about the liberation of women. Are you kidding me? The motivation was because they wanted cheaper labor, and you can see this reflected now. Oh, and they didn't just stop at the women. Now you got open border policies where they just inviting everybody into the country to take these jobs because they're willing to work for cheaper prices. You got companies now trying to optimize and completely replace people with artificial intelligence. And now that women are in the workforce and wages have stagnated, everybody just has to work harder now. So, of course, there's going to be less family because people don't have the time for it anymore. People are literally selling their most valuable asset. The only thing they really have, their time, for $1 that's decreasing in value every year. You're sacrificing your time for a thing that's not even backed by gold anymore. It's just being printed out, and it devalues itself every year more and more. I mean, how long can you do that for before there's big problems?
Or personal fulfillment, or having a job just so you can live. Like, none of that exists anymore. And so I want to read a comment that I just got on my channel, because I think that it's one of the most beautiful and tragic things that I've read.
Okay.
But it really solidifies what it is that we are now missing, what I think was really sold out here in America, at least. All I want in life is to just have someone to hold hands with when I go grocery shopping.
Wow.
I don't even have any dreams. I just want a little bit of love. Everything is just so empty now. And so, you know, what is really important for us to understand from that is that no matter what age that person was that commented, we all understand that. Every one of us can relate to that.
Yep. That's the
all of
human
us just
experience.
want a little bit of love.
Yep.
And so it is up to us. It is up to the Gen X as they rise into power, and millennials, and I think Gen Z especially, because we have that youth, we have that sense of, hey, things aren't working, and we're a little bit more capable on the internet or on social media. It is really up to us to say this can is not going to be kicked down the road. We have to stop thinking as much about what our needs are and what Gen Alpha's needs are, and their kids and our grandkids, and all of these other aspects. There has to be somebody that puts their foot down and says, no more.
Yeah.
It's like the Lorax. Every single tree has been chopped down and sold, and now they're trying to take the ground right out from underneath us. And there has to be, at some point, we begin to use our voices, and we begin to say, this is unacceptable. The corporations will continue to sell garbage if we consume it.
Yep.
And the government will
There it is.
continue to steal from us and lie to us,
Yep.
and do all of those things if they don't feel like we won't hold them accountable.
Yep.
So
And that's what I think about all the time. I think about how the people before us used to be and how they would have never tolerated the type of governments that we live under today. The government is supposed to be a representation of the people. It's that simple. And at this point, I don't think that the government represents me. I'm going to be completely honest. I still pay my taxes because I'm forced to and all these different things. But I have to be honest here. I don't think that a lot of the things the government is choosing to do nowadays actually represents the people anymore. And that's a big problem.
have to start demanding change.
They represent themselves.
Now, one of the things is that I think our society is, well, what can I do that creates the change, right? Like, I need to join the movement. I need to build the app, the business, say the thing. We just have to do our part.
Right.
For me, it's the channel. But it has taken years for me to work up to this point. And I don't know where it is that I'm going to go with this, but I'm going to continue to do my best. And the only thing that I do with this channel is I just go out every single day and I try to provide value. I respect your time. I respect what it is that you have going on in your life.
Yeah.
And I try to provide you value in the little bit of time that I have. But out in the real world, this is something that I've just recently noticed. I've been going to the exact same gym since I was 18. I've gone there when my grandpa died. I've gone there with the loss of two of very close friends. I've gone there on some of my best days, some of my worst days, some of my accomplishments. You name it. I've gone there. There is this chair or this desk and these chairs right when you walk in through the doors, right in front of the front desk. Since I've been going, those chairs have been like everywhere other than the table. Nobody pushes their chairs in. And, I always thought the first thing that you walk into is you see a mess. You see laziness. You see, a lack of respect for your environment. And the first thing that you see when you're walking out the door is the exact same thing. And so what I started doing is every time I walk in, I push the chairs in. And every time I walk out, I push the chairs in.
It's a little thing.
And I've been doing it for
Little
years.
things.
I just noticed here recently, I walk in, the chairs are pristine. I walk out, the chairs are pristine. I don't have to do it anymore. And now I don't know if it was because I did it enough that the front desk started to recognize, hey, let's do it a little bit, let's hold ourselves a little bit accountable.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was, just seeing somebody continuously push the chairs in. They thought, this guy's kind of weird. We got to make sure that we take care of him. Or it was just this sense of, if I hold my life with respect, other people almost kind of rise to the occasion. What if there was other individuals too that were thinking the exact same thing?
Yep.
I have to make sure that I push these chairs in. I know that we're just talking about chairs. When in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make much of a difference. But it's a way for us to be able to show up. Who knows what somebody was thinking when they walked in the gym? They're already frustrated. Then they look at the chairs. Oh, this place doesn't respect themselves. I don't respect myself. Look at what is, all of these things. We can fall into this negative trap so quickly. What if you can just plant a seed of kindness, a seed of accountability, a seed of respect? You can make a massive difference.
Yeah, sometimes I think to myself, we get like 80 years on this planet, bro, and the people that we're here on this planet with now are the only people we get to experience life with. So anytime I get the opportunity to cheer somebody up or crack a joke or just be outgoing in a sense, just to try to lighten up the mood, I choose to do that. And I do notice that not only does it make me feel better because I put myself into like a higher state of mind in order to, try to psy-up myself into being outgoing, but I also realize that it makes the people around you, it can make somebody's day for real.
It's, I think, 1 a.m. I've spent all day working. and I'm talking in front of a camera, and I would say that I think that I'm making a change. I don't know if it's a grand change, but if I'm able to help one person, just one person,
that's where it starts.
And they're able to go on and help another person, or, you know, be able to just feel a little bit better about themselves, that's a ripple of hope. That makes a difference. So do what it is that you can do to make a change. Stop pointing fingers. I understand that there is, you know, if you're going to point a finger, at least understand why you're pointing it, and make sure that you're learning from that. Don't just say these people suck and go on about your life. It doesn't make a difference. We have to start actively thinking, what can I do to start planting seeds for trees that will be able to give shade for the future generations?
Yep, there it is.
That's how we have to start thinking.
That's the thing.
I'm going to do everything that I can to ensure that that happens. So thank you all so much for your time. If this video provided value to you, if you don't mind to just, you know, like and subscribe if you haven't already done so.
Yeah, this is nice.
I'm doing everything that I can.
Yeah, man, he was spitting. I think a big issue is that people long for a world that just doesn't exist anymore. And we see that world being replaced with something else. And every time we see a new entry to what the world is going to be in the future, we don't really like it. And so I think it's really good anytime I see people having these conversations seem to be the ones that are just dominating culture at this point. And I think it's important because I think a lot of people feel it, and we need enough people to start saying it. Also, guys, if you like this video, I'm doing a course on reaction videos. For the people that were already waiting, I planned on releasing it today, but I'm going to wait till Friday. There's some things I want to put in, some things I want to take out. I want to put something out there that I'm going to be proud of. In the course, I'm not going to just be talking about thumbnails and titles. I'm going to be talking about the actual psychology that makes a good reaction channel a good reaction channel. I'm going to be sharing the tips that big reaction channels use to grow their platforms. And if that's something that you're interested in, be on the lookout for it on Friday. Let me know in the comments below if this video is a W or L, and give me the HBO special. That's our brother out special. Hit the like and the subscribe button for more content. Till next time.